Hi guys, my name is Lisa Whitehouse and I'm the artist behind Whitehouse Art. Thank you for joining me today for one of my mini tutorials. Be sure to hit subscribe if you want to see other videos like this one. Let's get started. So for today, I'm going to be walking you guys through how to paint a jellyfish in rainbow watercolor. So first things first, I like to get my watercolor block and all of my paints in my tray. For today, we're going to be using some bright colors. So a nice bright yellow, red, pinks, blues, and purples, and teals. You can have a variety of different colors. The key is just to have sort of a rainbow of options. So first things first, we'll draw out the picture. So for a jellyfish, it's fairly straightforward. You just want to do a domed shape. So we draw the dome shape, and then this is the bottom where all the tentacles or tendrils or whatever they call them on jellyfish. That's where they're going to come out. And then loosely just draw where they'll be. So that's all you're doing for this simple but elegant creature. So for this, I'm going to be using, majority of the time I'm going to be using a medium round brush, but I'll also use a liner brush for some of the lines that come out of the bottom of the jellyfish right at the end. That's some of the detail work, but mostly we're going to be sticking to a medium round brush. So I like to keep my water tray close by. I like to have a water tray with two compartments. So one compartment is for the dirty water and one is for the clean. So when you're rinsing off your brush, you use the dirtier water, and then for the nice clear washes, you use the clean section. So first things first, we'll lay down a layer of clear water. For the top of the jellyfish, I'd like to use darker colors. I'll stick to mostly blues and purples. And then we'll fade into the pinks for the inside, and I'll use a variety of colors for the tendrils that come out. Oopsies, my brush is quite old from sitting in water a lot, so it sometimes breaks apart. I have to keep it in mind to hold it at the base. It's always good with watercolors too. Make sure you're keeping it out of the water for long periods because that glue will break down over time. So we're just laying down the blues, letting it bleed in so we create a nice gradient. I'll use a little purple on the other side. Just being mindful of how quickly you move so that it's not drying too quickly as you're working. I'm going to use a little bit of teal right in the center. And because I want the top to be fairly dark, I'm going to take my thin liner brush and just drop in a little bit of dark blue right along the edge. And then a little purple just over here. As it dries, the purple won't bleed quite as far, and that's what you want. All right, so that's about all you want to do for the first layer of the top of the jellyfish. Now we're going to move towards the inside. And for this part, you have to be careful not to let your clear water touch the top because it'll automatically cause it to bleed in. So you want to leave a thin white line when you're doing your wash so as not to touch the darker top part of the jellyfish. So for this, we're going to be filling in the rest of the bottom. And you want it to have a nice clear sheen, not be bubbling water, but just have the whole thing filled. And then I'm going to take a little bit of pink and just drop it down here. As I said, being careful not to touch the top. And that's all I'm doing there. And then we're going to start adding those little tentacles or tendrils. Feel free to let me know what they are in the comments. I know I should have Googled it first. Oh, well. So I'm going to have them come down and turn to a different color. So what I like to do is, as I'm drawing them on, have the pink fade to the red. And then we'll do another one. And keep your hand fairly loose. You'll notice I'm letting my hand even shake a little bit. That's because you want to keep it nice and loose. You don't want any hard lines. So now I'll add a little purple in here. I want it to look a little bit like a color wheel. So we're having some reds. We can have some of the bottom fade to yellow. What you're trying to do is have the colors that are similar be in the same range so that we're not mixing the yellow with the blue and creating brown. We're letting the yellow touch the pink or the red, because that'll transition nicely. So at the far end of the jellyfish, we're going to let it go to blue and teal. So that's just, so where it gets to I'm having a few little jagged lines there. And then a few here. And then we'll just add a little bit of that teal up here. Trying to keep it nice and rainbow. I'm going to throw in a bit of green right here. I'll let this green reappear up here. As this is drying, you can kind of come back and add a bit more color. So that's all I'm doing for that layer. Now, because this is needing time to dry, I'm going to come back and add a bit more detail up here. If you're working fast enough, this will still be wet. So it's a good time to go in and darken it a little bit, because it'll barely bleed now. The page should be fairly dry, but wet enough that it'll still transition nicely. I'm using a relatively coarse watercolor paper. It's still a cold press, so it doesn't have a real rough tooth, but it still dries relatively quickly. So this is a good time to add a few splatters. For the splatters, I'm going to be using a flat brush. I find the flat brush lets go nicely. So I just go around and do a few splatters out around the edges and over top of the places that are already down. A few over here. Now I'm using some clear water just to help bleed these together a little more. And then I'll maybe drop in a little bit of red. A little more pink up here while it's still wet. Just makes things a little bit interesting. You don't need too many on this guy. I'm gonna add a few blue ones up here. I have a lot of control over the brush when I tap with one finger. Sometimes if you use two, you don't get as much control and the splatters go where you don't want them to. So that's why I use one hand. It does take some practice to get used to it. I recommend starting with just a piece of paper. So I'm liking what it's doing up here and I'm wanting to encourage it to bleed a little more. So all I do is take a clear brush and I just pull some of that out by massaging it right at the base so that it encourages the watercolor to bleed out, so that in some places there's not a solid line. Now usually you'd want it to be a little wetter before you do this. And then what I do is I dry off my brush so that it's not too wet. And that's all we're doing there. And same thing here. We want it to bleed out but not lose all the color. So if you use a dry brush, you can just stop it from going too crazy. So that's it for the first coat. So we're gonna let that dry. And then last but not least, we're gonna be going in and adding all those fine lines over top. All right, so now that the painting's had a few minutes to dry, we're gonna go on to the next layer. So for this layer, we're just going over a few of the spots we went over before and basically finishing it up. I noticed some of them lightened a little bit as it was drying, so I just wanna go over some of those spots again to have a real depth to it. So we're adding clear water over the top again, but not over the whole thing. Feel free to leave the center open. Then we're just darkening it again. So all I'm doing is going back over, adding a few. So that's all we're doing there. For down here, I'm going to add some clear water to go over these tendrils again. Tentacles. Just so that they're a little bit darker. And we'll have some yellow down here. Then we'll just darken this one and this one, and not darkening it all the way, just adding a little bit over top, as you can see. So just going in with the dark purple again and just darkening this line here. And you can see here the clear water didn't follow all the way down, so if you take a clear brush and just run it up beside it, it'll help those sort of bleed in. We don't want any strong lines. There's some real pooling going on here, so I'm just going to lift a little bit of it out. And so now I'm going to add some of the lines that come off of Jellyfish. You always see these little thin little lines. Red over here. Maybe a pink one. Then I'll do a blue or purple. That's all I'm doing for that. And then last but not least, I want to go in and add a few splatters. Some of those got a little darker than I would have liked, so I'm just going to lift them up a little bit. With splatters, you never quite know how dark they're going to go down, so that's what the beauty of having some paper towel on hand. You can have a bit more control over them if you just lift out some of the color. Alright, I'm just going to take a look here, see if there's anywhere I want to add a bit more detail. I think having a darker one over here might be nice. So just taking a little bit of purple. Having one go off. Maybe this one going off this way. And all we're going to do at the end is sign it. And we are done. So that's everything for today. I hope you enjoyed painting with me. Thank you guys for joining me today. I hope you guys had fun. Be sure to check out my other videos for more inspiration and leave a comment below with some ideas that you want to paint. Thank you and see you next video.